More homeless encampments have been popping up around the country in the wake of the recession caused by COVID-19. From Philadelphia to Portland, officials are working to move people from encampments into shelters. But some advocates for the homeless say the emergency shelter model isn't working. Instead, they endorse what's called a housing first approach, giving people forced into homelessness a permanent place to live. And those advocates say the change has reduced homelessness in places like New Orleans, New York, and Colorado, where Barry Peterson reports.
Some things are obvious at this busy Denver construction site, like how these 14 units are so small they are called tiny houses, and the not so obvious that these tiny houses may make a big difference in solving homelessness.
Housing solves homelessness, and so the only way that we're going to solve homelessness is to continue building housing.
How much space are we talking about here?
96 square feet. There will also be a front porch that attaches here in front of the double doors.
Cole Chandler is an ordained Mennonite minister who organized and now runs the tiny house project called Colorado Village Collaborative.
So we provide people their own space, their own four walls, their own door that they can lock, a place that they can store their things, keep their pets, and rebuild their lives. The
first 11-unit tiny house project was built 3 years ago. A shared kitchen, shower, and bathroom are all in one building.
It's tough on the streets when you don't have a place to take care of yourself and rest and do all that.
Being here offered Robert a way off the streets.
I have my own bed, I have a table there to eat and study, and my own fridge, and I would say it's spacious enough for a person to live in and have space to keep all their stories and stuff in.
With 5,000 homeless in Denver, these are meant to be a transition to long-term housing, like this 31-unit apartment building in Boulder, Colorado, that was built to give the homeless a permanent place to live. Where we met Ray Vose, who builds electric bikes in his apartment that can sell for about $1,800.
Oh, my word. These are the electric bikes?
This is the current project.
This is amazing.
Yeah, that one there is my daily driver right now.
What was the worst night or the worst day that you had when you were homeless, Ray?
I was sitting in a bar, spending my last $2 and change on a beer. That was cold. And, you know, just remember reading stories about freezing to death. You know, it's not that painful. You know, you feel warm. I was considering it.
Giving up?
Yeah.
Just going out and freezing to death?
Yeah.
Now Vose has a place of his own. Here, residents sign a lease and pay rent as a portion of any income, such as Social Security or disability. Greg Harms, CEO of Boulder Shelter for the Homeless, lays out the rules.
Just like anybody else who lives in an apartment, if you're going to have your friends over and have loud parties, that's not acceptable, right? If you're going to trash your apartment, that's not acceptable. If you don't pay your rent, that's not acceptable. As long as you meet the obligations of your lease while you're staying here, you know, you're welcome to stay.
Once there is housing, then comes dealing with problems like alcohol and drug abuse, illness, unemployment.
So there's not a requirement that you become sober. There's not a requirement that you get on your meds. There's not a requirement that you find employment. Because what we found is when you put those requirements in place, then people are inevitably not able to meet one of those requirements, and their housing is in jeopardy. And that's not the goal. The goal is to keep them housed.
What happens with my next Social Security check?
Housing First has its critics, chief among them Robert Marbut Jr., President Trump's executive director of the U.S. Interagency Council on Homelessness. He favors heavy policing, like that seen in cities that have dismantled homeless housing on the streets. But Housing First actually cuts down cost of police time dealing with the homeless and housing the homeless in jail.
What do the studies show about the cost of housing versus the cost of law enforcement?
Well, to house somebody in a permanent supportive housing program is $15,000 to $20,000. The cost if they're on the streets is probably about $40,000, $45,000.
Half?
Half, less than half.
Michael Doherty is the Boulder County DA.
Why is this better for the community?
I think we're all better served having a place where homeless individuals can stay a night, be connected to resources and housing that they need. And I think that's a better long-term approach. It makes fiscal sense, and it's also more humane.
The hardest sell is to neighbors who fear violence.
What do you say then, Greg, to people who look at the idea of putting something like this in their neighborhood and they're like, no, 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 we don't want, you know, drug users and alcoholics, and we don't want police coming all day and all night?
It hasn't been our reality. And if you look at the crime map of Boulder, the area that we're in right now is probably one of the safest and least crime reported areas in the city.
Every day in Boulder, just like across America, there are still homeless who come for a meal and a bed for a night.
They came out of India.
But with Housing First, there are more and more like Ray Vose.
I'm enjoying building these e-bikes, and you know, I've sold one bike to a neighbor, and you know, maybe that's something that can happen.
The point here is that there is now a chance for something to happen.
Yeah.
You look forward.
Yes. Yes, forward.
A life now with a chance to head in the right direction. For CBS This Morning, Saturday, Barry Peterson, Boulder.
The smile, the twinkle in his eye that you saw at the end there, something humane. It's cheaper than living on the street, and you're off the street.
The value you give somebody when you give them that place of permanence.
If nothing has worked in the past, why not try something?
You might try it, yeah.